Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we are one day in to Pittsburgh Penguins training camp, so naturally, we're going to overreact to line combinations. Sorry, Mike Sullivan. It's just the way of the world. But we're going to do it in a way that is respectful to Mike Sullivan's wishes when he says, please do not read into line combinations on the first day of training camp. You know we have to do it a little bit, though. But we have to kick things off with the biggest piece of news and notes, which is one massive name missing from the ice as they kicked off training camp yesterday at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex. Today, they're back on the ice already. I saw via Dan Potash that Jagger Joshua, who's dealing with an injury, was out there on the ice earlier today. So plenty of exciting news, plenty of news to just get to. Let's have some fun with these very fluid line combinations. Let's get started. And before we get into line combinations, of course, we got to touch on the biggest story coming out of day one of Penn's training camp is Erik Karlsson, injured day-to-day with an upper body injury, misses the first practice. According to Seth Rohrabaugh, he was in gym clothes watching the scrimmage, so he's with the team. It seems like he's working out still, just not able to get out there on the ice. What was your opinion and your thoughts, Horwat, considering 2 days ago, you said the Penguins were, and I quote, due for an injury-riddled season. Am I correct on that? And why did you put this evil on us, Ricky Bobby?
Yes, that is the exact quote. I own what I said because, and I mostly said it because, let's be honest, they've had a couple of relatively healthy seasons. Although, if I'm not mistaken, I think if you count in including depth players and the goalie situation that Tristan Jarry had a couple seasons ago, they've actually been regularly injured. So it just hasn't felt like one of those years whenever you're looking at past lineups and going, who are half these people and where are the stars? And whenever I said that, I didn't mean right away, in fairness. I was just kind of making an observation, and I did not expect it to blow up in my face 24 hours later. That being said, I'm not overly concerned about this. It's day-to-day. It is the first day at camp. I mean, it's not like it was, the Brad Marchand situation where first time he's able to talk to media. Yeah, guys, I'm recovering from 3 surgeries.
Yeah.
If anything, it's Erik Karlsson, just a day-to-day thing. Maybe it just happened during one of those last captain skates, and it doesn't seem too serious because, like you said, he's still with the team, still in track clothes, still seems to be in good spirits and still waiting to get out on the ice. It's just the first day at camp. We got plenty of time to recover and fully heal up from whatever it is. Again, we don't actually know because it's the NHL and we don't discuss injuries like that. But we know upper body and we know just day-to-day. Again, nothing serious, nothing too much to worry about, but I can't have nice things, can I?
Yeah, don't hit the panic button just yet, though, Pens fans, because according to Rob Rossi of The Athletic, Sebastian Aho was playing with Marcus Pettersson, which tells me that they expect that this is not going to be an extended absence. Not only Sebastian Aho, but according to Taylor Haas of DK Pittsburgh Sports, Mac Hollowell also had some reps with Marcus Pettersson. So that tells me those are 2 guys that are just filling in for the time being until Erik Karlsson comes back and he plays a little bit more with Pettersson. So I don't think this is anything that's going to be serious. Obviously, the day-to-day moniker is something that can change. We know that that is very fluid as well. And of course, all we're going to get to know is it above or below the belt? And it is above the belt in this one. So upper body injury. But the only big concern that I have about this, and again, this is just projecting out into the future, is hopefully this isn't something that lingers and bothers him throughout the season, a la what we saw last year from Chris Letang, where he might not be injured, he might not be missing games, but it does start to affect his game as the year progresses. You're hoping that that's not the case because really, one, they haven't given any indication. So again, this is just me thinking, speculating. This is nothing based on what we've seen or heard from the Pittsburgh Penguins. And 2, you need him to be fully healthy, especially going into a year where we all have much higher expectations than what he showed last year. Obviously, nobody's expecting 100 points again. Let's just get out in front of that cart before it runs us over. Nobody's expecting Erik Karlsson to score 100 points on this Penguins team. but we are expecting a better season. We are expecting to see more of what we saw late last year during that home stretch from Erik Karlsson. You're just hoping that he can start by October 9th without any ill effects from this upper body injury.
Yeah, and there really shouldn't be. I mean, he was healthy all of last season. If you were worried about any defenseman coming into this training camp or this preseason, battling things or having some nagging problems, it would have been Chris Letang. I mean, he had his couple of off-season surgeries that didn't require any, or a couple of off-season injuries that didn't require any surgery, and then I think surgery on other things, but nothing serious on one. But again, nothing serious. He seemed to be healthy and be ready to go, and that would have been your concern. And yeah, there's still a little concern of something possibly lingering with Karlsson. We don't know what it is, but we've got plenty of time to see him recover, probably see him, it's day-to-day, probably see him on the ice before the weekend.
Yeah, there's a chance he could be out there on the, again, it was day-to-day. He could be out there on the ice in
today,
40 minutes, whenever practice officially begins for day 2.
Yeah, so nothing to worry about. By the time you listen to this, you may already know that he was on the ice. It's nothing severe. And again, at least, and I'll keep drawing comparisons, like we said, at least it wasn't the Brad Marchand thing where he openly says I had 3 surgeries. And also, at least it wasn't like Rasmus Dahlin where he was on the ice, first thing in, they took him off because something happened. So we already know what it is beforehand. We are kind of aware of it, and it's already being taken care of. It's nothing to worry about at all. If anything lingers, it'll be noticeable.
And with that, let's move over and get into the meat of this episode, which is overreacting to line combinations. Again, sorry, Mike Sullivan, but it was the first day of practice, so there's some combinations out there that are a little bit unexpected, a little bit, out of the blue, which is fun. I mean, most of these, and again, I cannot stress this enough, most of these line combinations won't stick. Some of the pairings, some of the duos, some of the pairs, like I said, will stick though. And that's what we're going to look at here because, we're going to play a game called Show Me More or Shut It Down, which is not expecting any of these lines to make it to October 9th. But based on what we saw, do we want to see that potentially be a line that makes it to October 9th? Or are we good and we don't really need to talk about it further than the first week of the preseason? So that's what we're going to do. And again, most of these won't stick. I'm going to stress this time and time again. For example, Crosby's first line mate of camp the last 2 years. Last season, it was Vinny Hinostroza. Do you know how many minutes Vinny Hinostroza and Sidney Crosby shared during the regular season last year?
Had to be slim to none. I remember one of Crosby's lines was playing with 2 righties, and then I don't think it ever really happened.
Yeah. Well, he had the same amount of minutes as he did jersey number 13. That's how many minutes Vinny Hinostroza played with Sidney Crosby. And the year prior, Valtteri Puustinen was on the line with Crosby in the first week of camp. Valtteri Puustinen never got called up from the AHL that season. So again, just to illustrate, a lot of these lines are not going to stick and you're not taking them super seriously. But there is still something behind why these coaches put these players together. And we're going to go through a couple of the most interesting lines. And let's start it off with the beg line, as in we're begging for some bottom 6 help here. Michael Bunting, Lars Eller, and Cody Glass. Are you saying show me more, or are you saying you can shut this down?
This will get shut down. It's nothing even to overly worry about, mostly because we at least know Mike Sullivan likes to work his forward lines in pairs. Mm-hmm. And don't we just feel like Bunting and Evgeny Malkin are the big pair there?
Yeah.
And Bunting, Eller, Glass, again, Eller and Glass might be the pair of this one, to be so honest.
I don't even know about that because I feel like Glass is not a 4th line guy. I feel like that's Nola Chari's spot, and I feel like Lars Eller is best suited for 4th line center. But again, there's plenty of training camp to go, and I could be proven wrong in that.
Yeah, again, this is first day of camp line. We're not going to see much of it. Interesting scenario, though, because all 3 of them could at least be NHLers. And when you look at some of the lines you consider who might not be, I mean, there's 4 teams, like 3 teams, and then a 4th,
Yeah, and weirdly enough, the 4th team is mostly prospects and Nola Chari, which I'm a little confused about. And again, that's something that, sends up a sensor to me and is like, why is this like this? But again, things change. Players flop teams throughout training camp as well. So monitoring that, but an interesting starting spot for the veteran in Achari. But I think when I look at this, I'm saying, I don't really need to see more of it either. It's an interesting line. It gives you a little bit of everything, but you mentioned it off the top, and that's really where my conversation starts and ends with this. Bunting needs to be with Malkin to start the season. I'm not really thinking about him playing with anybody else.
No, not yet. Not until the season begins and we're underway and we kind of see the ins and outs and see what's working and what's not. As of right now, this is just a 3 NHLers sharing a line, and they had to go somewhere. And for what it's worth, sometimes when line shuffling needs to happen, when they're close in that sort of vein, Eller and Glass might get paired a couple times this season. Like you mentioned, Crosby hit Astroza for 13 minutes, which is more than I thought, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, absolutely. Maybe these three share a line, or not share a line, but share ice by happenstance at some point. So it's good to have that chemistry down, and that is also part of what makes training camp so interesting, especially when it's 3 NHLers. They're building a new chemistry because Bunting is still relatively new to the team, and Glass is obviously one of the newest players.
You mentioned sharing ice, perhaps penalty kill. I mean, all three of these guys could be factors on the Penguins' penalty kill. You're just trying to get them used to playing with each other. But again, we digress to this point. Not going to dive super deep into each of these lines. We both say you could probably leave this one in the first week of training camp. Let's move over to the pseudo second line, if you will. Ville Koivunen with Evgeny Malkin and Rickard Rakell. Horwat, do you want to see more of this line, or are you okay leaving this one in the first week as well?
Yeah, this one I will also leave in the first week. Mostly because that whole discussion we just had about Bunting and Malkin, that's an obvious choice. And, I mean, Rakell might start the season on Malkin's line, on that second line. So there's that pairing there. Where Koivunen falls is up to him, essentially. He just has to prove his worth, whether it is next to Evgeny Malkin and then earn a spot probably in the bottom 6 somewhere and roll from there. Otherwise, for the most part, this will also just be left in the opening week of camp.
Listen, I understand what you're saying, and I know I'm kind of going back on what I said with the Bunting needs to be with Malkin thing, but I do want to see a little bit more of this. If it's just in training camp, I do want to see more of this. I love Ville Koivunen getting this chance early on. Again, it's likely he starts the season in the American Hockey League. That's what I'm going to say, is I feel like that is likely. But this is a guy that put up mad points in the Finnish Elite League last year. Professional hockey. Coming over to North America, he has a lot of talent. He looked pretty good in the Prospects Challenge. I love him getting this opportunity early on, not stashing him with, fourth liners, but putting him with Evgeny Malkin and Rickard Rakell, kind of giving him a little bit of a litmus test early in this preseason. I love having it. I want to see more of it. I want to see this in a couple preseason games, even though I know that on October 9th, Ville Koivunen is not going to be on the left wing next to Evgeny Malkin. Let's go over to what I thought was one of the lines that was more interesting on day one, but one of the lines that got me the most excited. Drew O'Connor, Sam Poulin, and Rutger McGroarty. Horwat, are you saying show me more, or you can shut that down?
A little bit of both, because I want to see it. I just don't think it'll happen. So I'm going to say a little bit of both. I like this idea of Poulin getting a push with these guys, and that's kind of my focus on it, is that it's Sam Poulin getting a push with Drew O'Connor, who might start the season on the first line, and Rutger McGroarty, who also might start the season on the first line. And Sam Poulin getting that push with an NHLer and definitely the Penguins' top prospect. That sort of chemistry being built, at least between Poulin and McGroarty, is a good stepping stone for what could happen down the line. Not necessarily this season, but in a year or two, if Poulin is still around and proves to be an NHL player. And I just don't see it happening. But I think that's kind of where I stand on it. I absolutely want to see more of it, if that's kind of the answer you're looking for. Just don't know how much longer we will see it.
Yeah, you could take this line one of two ways if you're trying to read into it as to try to project out where any of these players will be. You can either read into it as, O'Connor and McGroarty. They start the year on the third line, put in whoever the third line center ends up being. I like that. I want to see O'Connor, McGroarty at the NHL level. I want to see those two terrorize defensemen because both of them are hounds on the forecheck. I want to see that. The question I have is, how well would this work offensively, right? McGroarty is young, never played professional hockey. O'Connor was good offensively last year, but was he driving play enough to be able to carry a 20-year-old? I mean, it depends on who they put in the middle, too. Kevin Hayes would go a long way in playmaking and setting up for these two. But I'm interested to see how that would work. The other way you could look at this is Sam Poulin is likely Wilkes-Barre Scranton's top-line center to start the season. If McGroarty doesn't make the NHL roster, he's not playing on any other line but the first line. You might be trying to build some of that already for the beginning of the season. So you can look at it from two ways. I'm a little shocked that this is where Poulin surfaced in the first day of practice. I don't know where I expected him, to be completely honest. He's a name that kind of floated to the back of my mind, but seeing him up here with the biggest offseason acquisition of McGroarty and the one player that had the biggest surprise impact last year in Drew O'Connor is a little bit shocking. I mean, you have a first-line player, you have a top prospect, and then you have Sam Poulin, who a lot of people are saying this is a make-or-break season for him, and a lot of people are expecting it to be a break.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying there. And that's kind of why I want to see more of all three of these guys.
Yeah.
It's just, you're right. I am also a little surprised to see Sam Poulin being given this kind of push this early.
Mm-hmm. Let's move over to the pseudo first line, and then we'll go over to defense after that. But the first line yesterday, everybody wanted to know all offseason long, outside of the Crosby contract, which we've talked about for 4 straight days, so we won't get into it. Who's playing next to Sidney Crosby? For the first time in 8 years, it's not Jake Gensel. So who is going to fill that role? Well, the answer on day one, at least, which again, I've stressed it enough. Anthony Beauvillier is the name that's there. So it's Beauvillier, Crosby, and Brian Rust. Horwat, what are you doing with this line?
Whenever the Penguins acquired Beauvillier, this was a line that was tossed out a couple of times just because Anthony Beauvillier could be one of those guys that floats all over the lineup, and pinning him on the first line is a fair option as well. So I don't know if I want to necessarily see it, but you can likely – I don't want to say get used to it, but you'll see it for a little bit longer. I think it'll last through this first week of camp, might even last into a preseason game or two. That's if Sid plays any preseason games.
True.
But it's something to definitely not – it's definitely something to watch out for and get used to, I guess, for the time being. I don't see it starting in the season, but for now, it's going to be that chemistry building time for Sid and Beauvillier.
Yeah, we led off this segment talking about, why this is the time of year where you don't overly exaggerate who's on whose line because, I mean, last 2 years, the person that's played next to Crosby in the opening day of training camp combined have played for 13 minutes with Sidney Crosby. But this is a little different. This one's different in the sense that this was a player that is expected to potentially play with Crosby at some point this season. And he is on that line on the first day of training camp, especially in a slot where Crosby hasn't had a different winger in 8 years. So maybe this is something that does stick. They could do some good things if Beauvillier has a resurgence and plays like he did when he was next to Matt Barzal all those years over in New York. But at the same time, this is the least exciting option for Crosby's left wing. I mean, you have McGroarty, who we've talked about. You could throw up Bunting. You could move, Raquel to the off wing and have him play with Crosby. That has been exciting in the past. In fact, that is the reason that Raquel had 28 goals 2 years ago. Beauvillier is probably the least exciting of the group. I would probably, personal preference, rather see Drew O'Connor start the season up there and give him the opportunity to build on what he had. So for that reason, I'm going to shut it down, and I'm going to say, I know we're not going to leave this one simply in the first week of training camp. I know that this is always going to be an option that the Penguins might go to, but, I would rather start off with something else. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Beauvillier does bounce back, and he looks great, and he looks even better than he did with the Islanders, and he looks like he finally landed in the right spot after bouncing around North America like a pinball machine for the last 18 months. But I think that of the options and of the lines, this one is the most likely to make it to October 9th intact, but also this is the one that I think I want to see the least make it to October 9th intact. But that's just because I have so many questions about what Anthony Beauvillier is going to be this year.
And that's understandable. It's just one of those situations where you look at it as, what did I call him? The Dom Simone almost. You know he doesn't necessarily have the skill to play on the first line. But if something clicks between Sid and him, don't be shocked.
Yeah. He could be the Dom Simone, or Penguins fans would rather him turn into the Pascal Dupuis, to be completely honest. But let's go over and talk about the couple of defensive pairs because, offensively, you saw them trying some things, some off-the-wall ideas, McGroarty and O'Connor, Koivunen and Malkin, Bunting and Eller. But the defense, to me at the very least, seemed to be pretty cut and dry, and I understand. It's the same thing. I'm sure Mike Sullivan would echo the same sentiment when we talk about defense as we do about the forward line pairings. But when I look at this defense, it's how I projected it, right? They had Pettersson with somebody different because Karlsson was out. But let's start with this one. Matt Grzelcyk, newcomer, next to Chris Letang. This was my initial expectation. So personally, I'm saying show me more because I like to be right, first and foremost. And two, because I think this is where they should start anyway.
Yeah, and it's been the early prediction this whole time. It is likely where it lands. I think you can have a little more fun with the forward lines, whereas defense, you got to build that chemistry between, especially if they're new faces. You got to build that chemistry early and get it set, not set in stone, but get it pretty set and get a healthy chemistry brewing right away. Mm-hmm. It's unless you're expecting. Oh, I already said the word. Unless you're expecting injuries to roll around quite a bit. I mean, you definitely want to make sure that your defensemen have good chemistry with each other. But at this point at this stage of camp, this early, you may as well pair them with the guys that they are likely going to be playing with all or most of the season and see if that's what's going to work. Because if it's not, and you can tell right away and it's not going to grow, it's not going to go anywhere, you have plenty of time to pull the chute now and find new lines, find new pairings. But yeah, the Grzelcyk-Letang pairing was expected from the start, and here we are just seeing it and hoping something can work out for Grzelcyk and finding a new rhythm in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I thought I was the crazy one whenever I was putting Grzelcyk with Letang and saying that there was no doubt about it. And then Daily Faceoff had Grzelcyk on the third pairing and Graves on the second pairing. And then State of Hoppy last week was like, yeah, well, you're hoping Graves and Letang work out. I was like, wait a minute, whoa. Matt Grzelcyk is on the third pair. Like, let's get this, or the second pair. Ryan Graves is on the third pair. Let's get this. Like, am I weird? Am I weird for thinking that? But this just kind of, to me, tells me, okay, it was pretty obvious, but I was getting a little concerned. I was like, are we really going to do that again? Because the problem I have with Graves being with Letang, it's insanity. What is the definition of insanity? Like the most overused word in sports talk entirely. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Why did Ryan Graves struggle at the beginning of last season? There are probably multiple reasons, but because him and Letang didn't work was one of the biggest ones. Why would you say, well, we're expecting him to bounce back. We really want him to answer this challenge, but we're going to start him off in the same exact spot that we started him off last year? Makes no sense to me. So it made all the sense in the world to go with Matt Grzelcyk, a guy who, listen, you have 5 guys that are already going to be automatically on this roster. And of the 3 on the left side, you know it's going to be Pettersson, Karlsson as your first pairing. That's just what it is. So you're between 2 players, Matt Grzelcyk or Ryan Graves. And just because of what I said with Ryan Graves, matched with the fact that, Matt Grzelcyk has played top line minutes for most of his career with the Boston Bruins alongside Charlie McAvoy, you would think that they would say, all right, obviously he hasn't played to that level the last 2 seasons under Jim Montgomery in Boston, but he still has that pedigree, and you're hoping a change of scenery, a change of scheme is enough for him to succeed and bounce back and find that game again with Chris Letang. So again, I'm saying show me more. And if this works, it's perfect. You would like to have the guy that you gave the big contract to be able to step up in the lineup. But at the same time, if this works and you can keep Graves down at that third pairing, which we'll talk about in a second, that is perfect and the best case scenario for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
It is. It's just what we want to see work out. The Penguins only have 6 spots on an NHL defensive group that takes the ice every game. They have 8 or 9 essentially NHL defensemen.
Yeah,
it's a good problem to have. It's just a matter of making each pairing work and also making the money work in the case of Ryan Graves and his contract and Matt Grzelcyk, and I know it's a short deal, but making that money work too. But it's gonna get interesting. I mean, you might be able to pencil in your three lines right now, your top six defensemen right now. Oof, man, you got a long camp ahead of us though.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm worried about on that third pairing, which we'll get to now, is does the business of hockey step into this? Does Kyle Dubas say, you know what, we don't want to lose this guy? If it comes down to one or two players and one of them is waivers exempt, a la Jack St. Ivany, does Kyle Dubas say, well, I'd rather not risk losing this other player. I want to see what he can do versus just sending down the guy that's waivers exempt. And that is what the third pairing was to start out camp. The third pairing that I want to see, the third pairing that I believe a lot of you want to see that are listening and watching right now on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from, Ryan Graves and Jack St. Ivany. That's a whole lot of man meat, Horwat. You got 6'5", 220 in Ryan Graves. You got 6'3", 198 in Jack St. Ivany. That is a big-bodied third pairing. St. Ivany uses it a little bit. Graves, you're 6'5", 220. Please use it. Like, that should be part of his resurgence this year. Please use your body as it's intended to be. You're a big guy. Get some people out of the net front. You can bully some people if you want to be a little bit aggressive. Again, that might be out of the realm of possible. That might be asking him to do something that is not in his nature. But I think you, at the very least, need to ask and see him try. But at the end of the day, it's Graves and St. Ivany to start out camp. Do you want to see more of that, or are you shutting that down?
I'm kind of on the fence because of where Sebastian Aho maybe files into this lineup, if he files in. Because Jack St. Ivany, you're right, this is where the business comes in. I like what St. Ivany brought to the team last year, especially down that stretch run. And he and Ryan Shea looked really good. But I'm also a fan of changing things up. And I get Jack St. Ivany was already a change up from what the Penguins were rolling with. But man, I don't know. It's a tough one because I like St. Ivany a lot. I like him in the lineup. I like him on this team. But also, I think I would also like Sebastian Aho in this lineup and on this team. So I'm extremely torn. And I'm mostly torn because obviously in a perfect world, we're thinking find the trade partner for Ryan Graves if possible. That just doesn't seem to be happening. So I would say for the time being, because of this is the pairing that it is right now, because I work in this camp to start without Karlsson, I'm going to say for now, yeah, I'd like to see some more. Just because, again, St. Ivany did do really good things at the end of last season, and he's only getting better. He's at that age where he's still improving, and again, Sebastian Aho also isn't a proven commodity in this lineup. We don't know if it's just not going to fit. You know, the style of play can fit all at once, can make sense all at once, if it's about the mindset of the player as well. So for the time being, because St. Ivany has that familiarity with the team, maybe even a little bit with Graves, this is a good start.
Yeah, the one guy that I think is on the outside looking in and you're hoping he doesn't get claimed on waivers is Ryan Shea, because to be able to have that Shea St. Ivany defense pairing in your back pocket this year would not be a bad thing. They looked really good together, both at the American Hockey League level and at the National Hockey League level. But I think that if St. Ivany sticks, Shea's the guy that ends up getting put on waivers. And if he's grabbed, that's one more tool taken out of your toolkit if you're Mike Sullivan, because it'd be nice to be able to go back to that if, injuries persist, which, Horwat continues to put that evil out into the world, but that's fine. But honestly, I'd like to see this. I think show me more, show me so much more. I want to see this because I think this is the pairing that sets Ryan Graves up for the most success. And I think if you're the Penguins, you need Ryan Graves to find success this year. I know it's a very low bar to say he needs to be better than he was last season, but you need him to not just be better, but prove that he is closer to what you're paying for this season. And starting him on the third pairing with Jack St. Ivany, I think sets him up for the best chance to get that. Now, the question is, of course, throughout the next 2 weeks, can St. Ivany outperform the other bubble players who have to go through waivers? Ryan Shea, I think that is going to be the biggest topic of discussion. If I have to, make an assumption, is going to be those two. Sebastian Aho signed a 2-year contract. He has a roster spot. Whether or not that is as the 7th defenseman or the 6th defenseman, that remains to be seen. I think Aho is the 7th. St. Ivany is the 6th is what I'd like to see. We'll see how everything plays out.
Yeah, listen, I spoke highly of Ryan Shea last camp because I was there in person seeing what he was able to do. I don't know if I'd have that same opinion this year because now I've seen a whole season. Now I'm seeing other faces enter the organization, enter camp, and are going to be fighting just as hard, if not harder, than Ryan Shea did last year.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, he starts with that quote unquote pole position because he's been in the organization. He's got a year under his belt here, got his first NHL reps in, but now is working up against other names that you recognize: Mac Hollowell, Philip Kroll, and just has to earn his spot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like I said, with not being there in person, I won't be able to provide as much insight as I could, but I will certainly want to keep an eye on how the defense works and seeing how it filters in and out. Keep close eye on those preseason games and learn from there.
Yeah, we went over 6 forward lines and defense pairings, all very interesting. And if you didn't hear a player that you were interested about, I'll throw a couple out here as well. I mean, Kevin Hayes played with Blake Lizotte and Avery Hayes, which got this question yesterday on the live. No relation between Kevin and Avery. No relation, but they did play on the same line yesterday. Jonathan Gruden with Tristan Brose and Atlee Calvert. That could 100% be a line for Kirk McDonald and
That's going to
this
be
year.
A nuts line, yeah.
Tanner Howe, the second rounder, was out there after missing Prospects Challenge. Had a full bubble, but was a full participant with Ravis Anson and Matthew D. St. Fowl. Owen Pickering was with Finn Harding. Isaac Beliveau was with Emil Pieneniemi. And then any other interesting ones here? Emil Bemstrom, which people are forgetting about, was with Ponomarev and Valtteri Puustinen at points. So again, a lot of interesting lines. John Ludwig with Philip Kroll at one point. A lot of interesting lines, but again, it is day one. It is a day in which Mike Sullivan preaches. Please don't read into this too much. That's just where everything stands as we start. Things will change as early as today. But I thought those first 6 were particularly interesting, especially the defense, because I feel like the defense, it's just what it's going to be. Like, I don't know what else the Penguins would do. I just feel like that's what it's going to be. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, spread the word. We try to do good work. We're hoping to do great work as the season progresses, get good interviews, do some lives, do some watch-alongs potentially as well. Might add that into the repertoire this season. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Or if you prefer to not see our faces, which, trust me, my mom has told me sometimes I just don't want to look at you, Nick. And I understand it. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. We'll see you next time.